Hi, I'm Kim Tasso, and today I'm going to share with you some key ideas around change management, both from a personal perspective and from an organisational perspective. We've all gone through massive change recently because of all the changes from COVID, because we had to, but without a major crisis often, managing change is more tricky. So I'm particularly excited today to talk about this because this combines two great passions of mine, one of which is kind of the psychology in individuals, and the second is kind of the business and the organisational context. So let's start having a think around personal change. So comedians here, very good at changing very quickly, unlike human beings. Most people think about change management from an organisational context, but as a psychologist, I like to consider personal change first from the individual point of view, because actually organisational change can't happen unless all the individuals within that organisation actually change. And one of the most simple and compelling models of personal change comes from a book called Switch, by two chaps called Chip and Dan Heath. It's a great book, and their model is very simple and very elegant. It says in order for change to happen, you need three things. You need to have a rational rider, you need to engage the emotional elephant, and you need to provide the first specific step you want people to change. The rational bit we all know about, that's having a plan and data and everything else, but engaging that emotional elephant, we talk about employee communication, employee engagement, all those good things is quite critical. And a good way to illustrate this point, I think, is if we think about personal fitness. So for example, we all know that we need to make sure we stay fit and healthy. That's the rational understanding and logical, and we all know we have to do that. However, our emotional elephant often keeps us stuck to the sofa, so we don't go and do it. So we can think about how do we engage that emotional elephant. You say, okay, I really want to be in those size 10 jeans for a party, virtual party. So I am going to get on with this. So my first small specific step might be to put the gym kit in the car, or to leave my running shoes by the door, or to book on to my, Pilates or Zumba class. So there you've got the rational reason I need to get fit. Secondly, the emotional engagement, because I want to be slimmer for a party. And thirdly, the specific thing you're going to do. Okay, so that's an example there. An earlier video I produced looked at the emotions, going back to the elephant, we experience as we go through a major change. And so some of you may have had a look at that and understand and connect with the sort of changes that you went through and emotions with COVID. First of all, there's shock, and then there's kind of denial, and then there's kind of anger, and then there's depression, before you finally kind of maybe do some bargaining and finally start accepting and experimenting with the new way of things. So have a look at that video. William Bridges, another psychologist, gave another interesting model for personal transitions, and he said that before we can kind of move on and change, we have to give ourselves time and space to kind of mourn and grieve what's gone and we've left behind before we can embrace something very different. And he has his change model also in 3 stages, which is kind of endings. First of all, saying goodbye to the past, a sort of neutral zone where we're not quite clear about where we are and where we want to go before we start on that new beginning. Okay, so that's kind of a couple of ideas about personal change, and we have to remember that 70 to 90% of our behaviour is habit, so it's extremely difficult to effect any kind of change. It takes a lot of our energy to do that. There's also what Time reported in terms of anxiety around change, and he says it's not until survival anxiety outweighs learning anxiety do we actually embrace learning new behaviours. And we saw that, I think, again with COVID very clearly. And again, depending on what model of the human behaviour you adopt will dictate what sorts of approaches you use to change management in the organisation. So for example, there's the behaviourist approach, and I've used a rat here for that because Skinner and his rats in boxes pressing levers to get food is a good example. So if you subscribe to the behaviourist view of human behaviour, then your approaches to change management will focus very much on kind of rewards and punishments. If, however, you're more of a psychodynamic, so here is Freud. Remember, his work was all around, the importance during our early development and how our natural drives in our id are overridden by our superego, which is the rules we absorb from society and negotiated by our ego. So, if you're having that view of human behavior, then obviously your change management models in the workplace are going to be quite different. Similarly, if you're a humanist, and I've got a plant here, you subscribe to the view that everyone's trying to self-actualize and reach their full potential. So your change management support mechanisms in your organization will be around coaching and autonomy and training and development and supporting people who are trying to do the right thing. And then the other kind of main model we see is the cognitive model. So I've got a little model of a brain here, which we use for studying kind of neuroscience. So if you subscribe to a cognitive rule, you'll be very much on that rational aspect of what we talked about earlier with that change model, and you'll be focused on giving people targets and plans and very rational approaches to changing their behavior. Okay, so some thoughts really about personal change, and we've started looking at organisational change, and it's also interesting from the research that we know something like 75% of all organisational change models fail. To make sustainable change work in the organisation, we need three things. We need strategy, we need leadership, and we need culture. And you'll remember Peter Drucker's very famous saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, so back to that importance of the behaviour and psychology. Many people have written really good models on how to guide your change management. Probably one of the best known is John Koster at Harvard Business School, and he has an 8-stage model. But the model I'd like to share with you is actually 10 stages, also from Harvard, but from Elizabeth Moss-Kanter. So she has this 10-stage recipe, if you like, for change management. So first of all, we analyze the organization and its need to change. We create a shared vision and a common direction. That's the kind of emotional engagement, I guess. And we have to separate from the past, and that draws on that material from William Bridges I mentioned. Create a sense of urgency. Again, that's more around the emotional engagement. Support a strong leadership role. Line up political sponsorship. I think it's quite interesting watching what's going on during the pandemic to see how attitudes and views towards leadership and people who support the views of what we need to do. Create an implementation plan, develop enabling structures. Obviously the organisation has to change to support what you're trying to do differently and new rather than the old structure. Communicate and involve people. In my models I would always pull that really up a lot earlier, because you should really have engagement with your people right the way through the process. And then finally reinforce and institutionalize your change. So we can see from that model that leadership and vision are vitally important, and we can see the elements of those personal change models being brought in there. So a few other kind of thoughts on a couple of books in this space that I really like. The first one is called The Change Catalyst. You can see here that I've read it very well, and actually my dog had a chew of it. He thought it was very good. There's 10 things that will stop change happening, and also in here 10 things that you have to make change work, very similar to the model from Elizabeth Moss-Kanter. So that's a really good book. And the other book I really like is this one, which is Neuroscience for Organisational Change, because again that combines for me the two big passions: what's going on in our brains as individuals and how that relates to what's going on in the organisational change space. Okay, so some very fast thoughts on personal and organisational change management. Hope you found it useful, and thank you very much for watching and listening. Hope to meet with you in person very soon.